Good morning, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today we are returning to the Summa Theologica or Theologia by St. Thomas Aquinas, and moving on to his second question in the opening sequence, which is on the existence of God. Does God exist? Can we demonstrate His existence? And is His existence self-evident to us? So, remember, sacred doctrine or Scripture, its chief aim is the advancement of knowledge toward God, not only as He is in Himself, but also as He is in the beginning of things in their last end. Now, to fully articulate this science, St. Thomas decides to treat several topics in sequence: of God, of man's advance or movement toward God, and then of Christ. And he divides his treatment of God, the first of those categories, into three parts: whatever concerns the divine essence, whatever concerns the distinctions of persons, and that means like our hierarchical organization of society, like what makes a man distinguished from one another. And then the third one, whatever concerns the procession of creatures from him, which is a fancy way of saying, God's creation. That's the last part. So we're going to start examining the nature of whether God exists or not by looking at whatever concerns His essence Himself. And to do that, we must first tackle a simple question: does God exist? Answering whether God exists is a tall order and a mighty question. And St. Thomas, has divided it into three parts. Beginning with, is the existence of God self-evident? Can one demonstrate or show that He exists? And then the third one is simply whether He exists or not. Now, we will look later at the manner of God's existence and anything related, the manner of His existence, which is like, how does He exist? Like omniscience, omnipresence, those sorts of things. And then anything related to God's knowledge, will, and power. But to begin, we're going to look at the self-evidence of God's existence. And, it's interesting. It raises several interesting questions. So, first, many suppose that whatever is self-evident is that knowledge which has been implanted by nature. Things like breathing and automatic reflexes. You don't have to think about your heart beating in order for it to pump blood through your body. It does that on its own accord. Now, since it appears to some that all are born with knowledge of God, would that not mean He was self-evident? Others add that truth itself is always self-evident, and that since God is truth, He would have to therefore also be self-evident. That's a simple argument. Gravity, it's obvious that it exists, so is it obvious that God exists? Now, St. Thomas refutes these claims and states that God's existence is anything but self-evident, and uses a line from Aristotle's Metaphysics to support his claims. Now, Thomas, quoting from Aristotle's Metaphysics, recalls that Aristotle claimed all principles of first principles are self-evident, things like gravity, and that also all things that are self-evident, such as first principles, are not able to be denied by the mind. You can say that gravity doesn't exist, but you can't really, it doesn't do anything to it. So St. Thomas Aquinas uses that and says that since people are able to deny that God exists, His existence must not be self-evident. And then he goes on and further elaborates two different categories of self-evident objects. So, St. Aquinas tells us that there are two categories of self-evident things. Things that are self-evident in themselves, but not to us, and then things that are self-evident in themselves and also to us. So, he takes a simple statement as an example, that is, man is an animal. So propositions like this are self-evident because the predicate, which is man, sorry for the grammar terms here, guys, is contained in the predicate, which is animal, because it's what takes the action, is contained in the subject's essence. So, man is an animal. The concept of animal is contained within that of a man. So man contains the essence of animal, and to everyone knows this, and to everyone that knows this, it will be evident to them. On the contrary, when a proposition or statement has elements that are unknown, it may be self-evident in itself, but not to us. So Boethius, the 6th century Roman statesman, stated that there are some mental concepts self-evident only to the learned. For example, calculus. If you haven't learned calculus, those concepts may not be evident to you yet, despite the fact that they are true, even though you don't understand them yet. Now, we can apply these principles to the question to the question at hand: does God exist? So, as God is his own existence, this proposition is self-evident. However, we don't know God's essence. St. Thomas continues our pursuit of knowing whether God exists or not, at least philosophically, by asking a simple question: can the Lord's existence be demonstrated? Now, trying to prove whether God exists is a tall order and obviously raises quite a few concerns, but Aquinas lays out a couple of common objections, such as belief in God's existence as an article of faith. And since faith-based articles are not proven through demonstration like science is, and remember, demonstration in this context is kind of like a scientific experiment, then a demonstration of the Almighty is impossible. So, a further point St. Thomas raises is that since God's essence is unknowable to us, does that not mean we should only be able to perceive him through what he isn't, through the negative, so to speak? And then thirdly, or the third objection would be, even if we could point to his existence, many have said we could only point our direct attention to his effects, like we've mentioned, which are disproportionate to him, since his effects are manifested in the real world, which is bound by natural laws, and God supersedes these natural laws. He is supernatural. Would that not mean that there is no proportion, like Aristotle would say? And thus, would that not mean our knowledge of him is at the very least limited? In response to these objections, St. Thomas counters by using a verse from the book of Romans. In chapter 1, verse 20, the apostles say, "The invisible things of him are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made." And then St. Thomas goes on to remind us of our first principles, which is just the way we explore things scientifically or through the use of logic. Remember, back then, philosophy wasn't like a subdivision of science or anything. Anything scientific was known as a part of natural philosophy. So demonstrations in the scientific sense can be made in one of two ways. Now, these are logical devices that we can use to come to truth about various things. And those two ways are a priori, meaning what is prior to us, or a posteriori, meaning which is prior relative to us. Now, these terms are closely related to what will later be known as deduction and induction. But the a priori knowledge essentially uses principles, and the principles of first knowledge, or first principles as Aristotle called them, to elucidate the facts about things. Like, today we may use the constant of gravity, like 9.81 meters per second squared, and we can tell how fast an object is going using that constant. Now, a posteriori things, they differ a little bit. So, a priori knowledge is Latin literally for what is earlier, while a posteriori is from the Latin term for what is later. Now, like I said, these are related to a posteriori is usually referred to as induction today, and he uses experience to derive facts. But it can lead to faulty or erroneous conclusions, as Merriam-Webster's dictionary puts it. Just because the rooster crows at noon, or at whenever the sun comes up, does not mean that the sun came up because the rooster crowed. Or, likewise, just because lunch is always served after the church's bell tolls, doesn't mean that will always be the case, or that lunch was caused by the bells tolling. So now these terms, a priori and a posteriori, are derived from Aristotle's work in what was called the Organon. And again, a priori refers to the use of logic using first principles. These are things we know without needing to experience them. The biggest example probably being math. We don't need to experience that 1 is 1 or 2 is 2 to know that that's true. However, recent advances in linguistics point out that may not be the case. But still, mathematical truths exist without us needing to experience them. Now, whether or not we can comprehend them is a matter of linguistics. But a posteriori, that's actually, it's what covers most knowledges or most domains of human science and human endeavor. This is the knowledge that we gain through experience and empirical observations. And there's a reason why it encompasses so much of our knowledge of the world. And the reason why that is so powerful, a posteriori knowledge, is, you see, God granted humans 2 gifts, which is reason and time. And with these, we are able to do something incredible, which is observe the world. And the power of observation lets us to, watch causes and see the effects that unfold from them, and to gain a better understanding of all that entails. And as we deepen our understanding of this process, we come to better grasp the inner mechanics of the principles at hand. This is why we have all the amazing technology we do today, and why you're able to watch this video with me right now. So, how does Aquinas apply all this to whether or not God exists? Well, it's pretty simple. Every effect has its proper cause, and by knowing its proper cause, we are able to, or by knowing the effect properly, we are able to trace and infer its cause. So, although we may not be able to directly experience God's existence, we can infer that he does indeed exist by looking at the world around us. Yet, at odds with this view, Aquinas admits that no perfect knowledge may ever be derived of God through his effects. Although careful observation may allow us to deduce and infer the cause of any given effects, when these are not in proportion with each other, as is the case with God, because God is infinite and his effects, creation, all of this, is finite, they are not in proportion. So any knowledge obtained in this manner will be imperfect in nature. However, they are preambles to faith, this knowledge obtained of God through the exercise of reason. Further complicating the matter, St. Thomas tells us that God's essence is unknowable to us as mere mortals. So, we would only ever be able to know him through what he isn't anyway. In other words, like the negative on a photograph, or like how we detect the presence of black holes. They absorb all manner of energy, black holes do, so we can't directly observe anything from them. We infer their existence from the effect they have on the world around them, just like God. Now, to close the second question of the second article of St. Aquinas' Summa Theologia, whether you can demonstrate God's existence, he reassures us that just like you can accept the theory of universal gravitation or of relativity and the effects it has on our world without actually understanding the way these principles work, so one can accept the existence and power of the Lord Almighty without actually understanding how He operates. Just like one may accept the truth contained within scientific principles, one may also accept the truth contained within divine precepts, despite lacking a complete understanding of these concepts. Now, to move on, St. Thomas goes on and asks an even more fundamental question: whether God exists at all.